Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Voice Podcast. This is Vernon R.E. Jones, managing broker, owner of Jones Homes, and for over 30 years, we have serviced the 7-county Denver metro area. What the devil is inflation? What does it mean? What measures it? The inflationary pressures that happen affect everything, from gas to housing to food, you name it. Let's kind of talk about what exactly is inflation. I mean, you can go to the store and you can see that, okay, my bottle of wine is a little higher, or my detergent is a little higher, or a lot higher. But basically, inflation refers to the rise in prices of goods and services over time, which reduces the purchasing power of the dollar. Again, it reduces the power of the purchasing price of the dollar. The inflation rate is the percentage that describes how quickly these prices are rising. While several government data sets track price changes, the CPI, or Consumer Price Index, represents about 90% of the population, of the U.S. population. The CPI measures inflation by tracking the price fluctuations of a basket of goods and services over time, providing a clear picture of how inflation affects everyday living expenses. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, tracks two measures of inflation: headline and core. Headline inflation tracks specific subsets of consumer spending like food, housing, and transportation to reflect the actual cost of living. The basket of goods is meant to represent the actual spending habits of a typical consumer in the U.S. Core inflation tracks all other spending categories. Again, the basket of goods is meant to represent the actual spending habits of a typical consumer in regard to the U.S. core inflation, as it tracks all other spending categories. Food and energy prices in particular can be highly volatile due to factors like weather or supply chain issues or war. So excluding these categories from core inflation gives a clearer picture of long-term price trends. Now, when inflation rates are positive, it means that the price of goods are increasing. When inflation decreases, for example, from June of 2022, it was 9.1, to June 2023, it went 3%. So 9.1 to 3%. Prices are still rising, however, but just at a slower pace than before. If the inflation rate is above zero, prices are rising still. Prices only fall during deflation, which occurs when the inflation rate drops below zero, signaling a general decline in the cost of all goods and services. Since the Consumer Price Index was first measured in 1913, inflation has fluctuated but has generally remained positive. The last time headline inflation exceeded 10% was between July and October of 1981. The all-time high was in June of 1920, when inflation reached 23.7%. The most recent month in which there was deflation was April 2015. Now, let's kind of talk about how the price changes within the basket of goods can vary. To account for this, the Consumer Price Index uses a weighted system to represent how much the average consumer spends on a particular category and compares it to everything else. So housing-related costs have more weight than something like recreation. The weighted system means that if the prices of some items spike, the headline inflation rate reflects the overall change in costs across the entire basket of goods. While the current headline inflation rate is about 2.7% currently, the cost of eggs has increased by 37.5% compared to the previous year. On the other hand, fuel oil and other fuel prices have dropped by 10.7%. When only looking at items considered in the core inflation rate, motor vehicle insurance had the highest price increase at 12.7%. Information technology, hardware, and services dropped the most. They dropped by 3.5%. The Consumer Price Index is representative of all urban areas in the U.S. because every area has its own mix of supply and demand. Inflation rates differ by location too, based on data from November 2024. For urban areas tracked in the CPI, New York had the highest inflation rate at 4.3%. Let's go over some others. Chicago comes in next at 3.8%. Honolulu, up 3.5%. Los Angeles, up 3.2%. Boston, Massachusetts, up 3.1%. Washington, D.C., up 2.7%. San Diego, up 2.6%. Denver metro area comes in at 2%. Dallas, Texas comes in at 1.9%. Minneapolis, Minnesota comes in at 1.7%. Tampa, Florida comes in at 1.6%, and Riverside, California comes in at 1.1%. Hopefully just discussing what the CPI is, what inflation is, how these things affect everything. You got a better understanding of what the CPI and what inflation rates can do to products and services. Just wanted to touch in with you. Hopefully you guys are having a good holiday season. As always, feel free to call us at 303-359-8218. This is Vernon Jones. Thank you for listening. And as always, please be safe.